Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the new album from Sounds from the Ground. Binary. Sounds from the Ground, that's Nick Wolfson and Elliot Morgan-Jones. Hopefully we're no stranger to these guys on this channel. I covered their last album, Native Soul, back in 2017, so I'll link that video in the description, but in case you missed that one. SFTG are a UK chill-out, down-tempo dub outfit, and one of my favorite bands of all time. They've been putting out album after album regularly since 1996 with Kin, and they have yet to release an album that I thought was anything less than really good, or that I haven't put into my regular listening rotation for an extended period of time. I think I've said before that I consider all of their main albums to be at least in the 8 range or higher. Even in retrospect, there are definitely a couple that would be pushing it and are maybe closer to the high 7 range, but that's as low as it goes for them. They're one of the most consistent electronic outfits I know of, and I can always count on them to deliver a quality set of interesting and evocative down-tempo soundscapes, with each album usually delivering some kind of new flavor or feel that differs from their previous albums, but still always adhering to a certain kind of style that is uniquely their own. And that particular style has just been embedded into my life ever since I discovered them in high school. Now, a lot of their albums, especially in this decade, have required plenty of repeat listens to really soak up and enjoy to their fullest extent, and that's exactly why I've been waiting on this particular review for so long. SFTG have always tended towards the more subtle side, the kind of thing that you can sit with and contemplate for a long time and notice new things, or just slowly start to familiarize yourself with their grooves and start to get into them more. Mind you, their last album, Native Soul, was a bit of an odd exception to that since it totally floored me. It was one of their most immediate in years, and with not a single weak track. I loved it pretty much right from the get-go, and it's only gotten better as time has gone on, like just like everything else they've put out. Ended up with a 9 out of 10 rating and ended up being honored as my second favorite album of 2017 overall. That was gonna be a tough act to follow, not gonna lie, and admittedly I wasn't expecting to be as blown away a second time in a row. But as far as I'm concerned, you also really can't go wrong with these guys. This latest album, Binary, marks their 25th anniversary and advertised as having 9 striking original tracks, which tells me nothing, but cool. What did we get with this thing? Well, first of all, perhaps unsurprisingly, lightning didn't strike twice, and I did not fall in love with Binary on first listen. Once again, this was one that needed to grow on me, and I felt like I needed to be able to really familiarize myself with it. Though there have been albums of theirs that have taken longer to grow on me than this one, like their 2013 album Tribes probably holds that record right now, since that one left me underwhelmed for a good 2 years after the fact until it really started to click with me the kind of mood that they were trying to create. And Wider World from 2012 is another great example. When I first heard that one, I really only liked one track on it and found it to be a bit of a strange change of pace for them that didn't play to their strengths, as well as have some of their most bizarre and unwelcoming pieces to date. But now those exact same things that turned me off, I now regard as that album's biggest strengths, and I see it as one of their most creative and interesting projects to date. One of my big favorites now. The thing about Binary, though, is that while it similarly took me a while to get into, it initially turned me off for the exact opposite reason that Wider World initially turned me off. Binary doesn't really have any super strange moments that sound totally unlike any other SFTG track I've ever heard. Binary just kind of sounds like an amalgamation of all the kinds of sounds they'd explored since like 2006 or so. It doesn't really feel like it has a unique flavor to it that you couldn't already get out of a previous album of theirs. Now, this was also kind of true of Native Soul. A lot of the tracks from there pretty closely resembled ideas they'd already explored, but they were just so consistently well executed that I didn't care. Binary, I mean, on one hand, I don't think there's any bad or even underwhelming tracks on it. It's really consistent quality-wise. But I don't think it has any new all-time favorites of mine, or like major big standouts. They're all really good, but none of them are amazing to me. I do think one thing that kind of helped this album click more for me is seeing it as a companion of sorts to Tribes, made up of a lot of the exact same synth tones and patterns, but with a more of a generally uplifting and refreshing mood, while Tribes was more depressing and downbeat. While I think Tribes had a better command of its mood that carried over its entire running time, I was definitely able to get into Binary faster than that one and find the experience as a whole more enjoyable. So whatever, let's go down track by track. We start out with Blaze Mountain, a track that I was expecting from the title to be on the more aggressive or out there side, but as it turns out is very light and breezy and delicate, a lot of major key progressions that end up not too far from Tribe's opener Infrared, but much less ambiguous. At first I found it almost too pleasant, but those little piano licks around the edges of the synth grooves really help this track get me in the mood it's trying to convey. Very nice stuff. Ypes Casino is a bit by the numbers by their standards, your typical down-tempo blend with all manner of sparkling melodic tinges over a solid foot-tapping groove, with just the slightest hint of melancholy. While these guys have no shortage of tracks that sound like this one, the melodies themselves are quite enjoyable and easy to get into. Another very nice track. Once we get past this point though, this is where the album really starts to get into gear for me and pull my attention even more. Planet X is one of the most interesting ideas on this album, with all these strange sounding distant synth lines and icy pads with subtle percussion textures and spacey bass lines. It really sounds like it's coming from some kind of distant, desolate planet, as the title would have you believe. And on top of that, it prominently features this vocal sample where it sounds like this kind of scientist guy is talking as if he's trying to contact an alien life form, but he's just talking to some mumbling British woman, which is kind of funny, almost like something you'd hear sampled on an Orb album or something. This was definitely among the most memorable tracks in the bunch. And then we get Missing You, which features the vocals of Taz Alexander. And let me tell you, even if the instrumental she sings over is kind of typical by their standards, her presence is a major breath of fresh air. It's been such a long time since we got an SFTG track with a vocal guest, not since Through the Ages in 2009 have we heard someone singing over one of their tracks. And it's great to hear something like that again. I believe this is the third track of theirs that Taz has appeared on, the other two being Move On from Luminal and Beautiful Feeling from High Rising. Missing You may not be even close to as good as Move On, which kind of stands to reason since that's one of my favorite SFTG tracks of all time, but this is also better than Beautiful Feeling. It feels like it's moving a bit more than that one was, and it's easily the catchiest track on this album too. Careful now, I'm missing. So that track is great. I would love to hear more of that kind of thing from them. Anyways, that quality's kept up, but in a very different way in the next two tracks. The Lines was my other big favorite from this album, featuring all these menacing and rough synth pads in the background, accompanied by these other choir-like pads, as well as muffled video game-ish bleeping and clanking melodic licks played forward and reverse, among plenty of other melodic elements that vary in tone. The whole thing creates this kind of portentous and dark atmosphere that wouldn't have felt out of place on their 2010 album, The Maze. So that is an excellent track. And then Heartlands goes even weirder and creepier, kind of more of an ambient-centric track with all these harsh but not totally unwelcoming synth pads shifting in and out every few beats. There's these weird growling sounds that come in every now and then. There's also very little in the way of percussion, just a couple of subtle tribal drumming and woodblock tapping. All of the groove is being determined by the bass lines. Maybe not quite on the level of unwelcoming and strange as the weirdest moments on Wider World, but theoretically could fit alongside tracks like those. That's another major highlight for me. Then we get Felt, and we've returned from the depths to a more traditional chill-out groove along the lines of something like Would Be King from their Rhythm and Reason EP. Much like the earlier track Ypes Casino, it doesn't have a lot of instrumental flavor to make it that distinct from the usual fare you'd expect from them. But I do think this track has a bit more flair and memorability than that one did. A couple of more interesting synth progressions that digress from the core groove as well. Still very enjoyable track, and one that I never felt the urge to skip, a solid highlight from this thing that it probably was improved quite a bit by being like a teaser track that was released beforehand. Helped it stick out more in my mind. Then there's Train of Thought, which is another kind of stranger moment on this project. Kinda has like a sharp mechanical tone to its percussion textures and stabby bass line, alongside some vaguely screeching and honking synth blares and washes, but there's also a really subtle and comfortable progression of warm tones underneath, and some playful piano lines as well. Do 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 do. While the ingredients that went into it are all mostly ones they've worked with plenty of times before, the actual blend they settled on isn't quite like anything I've heard from them. It's kind of hard to describe, but I very much like that strangeness. This is another one of the biggest highlights from this thing. And finally, we close with Annie's Land, a spacey number with lots of uplifting and sparkling ambient textures going against some standard repetitive synth lines and patterns. Personally, I found it to be a bit of an underwhelming ending that didn't really have the strongest emotional pathos or develop as strong a groove as I'd like, at least in chunks of it. There is this one bass line that pops in like a little before the halfway mark that pulled me in a lot more, and once that showed up I was able to get into the track more. Also, the various squeaking textures all over the place were a nice touch as well to add to that kind of spaciness. So yeah, that's Binary. Once again, SFTG are delivering the kind of material they do best, and the kind of stuff they're most well known for doing. Their dub and downtempo grooves are as strong as always, and they've created a strong front-to-back listening experience that, while it took a little bit to grow on me, still very much feels up to their high standards. But I also can't deny I came out of it hungering for more. Binary is a very solid album to me, and if you're not as innately familiar with their back catalog and history, then you likely won't have the same gripes I do. It succeeds in all the ways an SFTG album should. But as someone who's had them in regular listening rotation for years and knows their whole back catalog back and front, I felt Binary kind of played it safe. It does make sense to me that SFTG would celebrate their 25th anniversary with an album that embraces the elements of their music that have most defined them and made them who they are, one that plays to many of their greatest strengths. But I don't know, I kinda hope they'd go further. Like, even the weirdest tracks on here, I've heard them do similar stuff before, and even if I might enjoy this thing from front to back, I can also put on Native Soul right after it and get a similar experience that's even more potent. As far as anniversary celebrations go, I kinda like more what they did when they celebrated their 20th anniversary in 2014 with Alchemy, returning to their old analog synth gear they used on earlier albums like Kin, but using that old school sound and presenting it in a completely different manner that they hadn't really tried. But whatever, I think my thoughts on this thing just go to show how high a regard I hold these guys in. This album is still really good, and I imagine I'm going to keep listening to it just like I have with all their other albums. If this is one of their lower tier projects, I think that really says something about how consistently good they are. And maybe you can talk to me again in Year Endless season. I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out this thing grows on me even more. I still think Binary is absolutely worth your time, but I'm personally hoping for something a bit more adventurous for their next project. Maybe something weirder, more experimental. Maybe they'll have more vocal guests. That would be cool too. But I don't know, it doesn't really matter. Needless to say, I'm still looking forward to whatever they plan on doing next, and I quite enjoyed this latest set of tracks. I'm overall feeling a 7.7 out of 10 on this thing. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. If you want to add yourself to that list or make me a review something, a link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.